To God be the glory.
Hello, welcome back to our study. Now, in our outline, you might notice that we've made it down to the last events of Jacob's history, and this is chapter 35, verses 1 through 20. And so let's get into that chapter now. Let's look at the first few verses, and then we'll make some comments. Chapter 35, verse 1. Then God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there, and make an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you fled from the face of Esau your brother." And Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Put away the foreign gods that are among you. Purify yourselves and change your garments. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, and I will make an altar there to God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and has been with me in the way that I have gone." So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods which were in their hands, and the earrings which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree which was by Shechem. All right, notice verse 1 that Jacob is told to go to Bethel. Remember the name of Bethel, it means the house of God, and there he's to make an altar. And so Jacob understood that he was to leave at Jehovah's command. He was to purify himself and to build an altar there, but also to purge out all of the idols. Remember, Rachel had taken her father's idols when she left his home. In verse 4, it says they gave up all the tokens of idol worship, not just the idols themselves. And so they're ready to go to make the journey and to build this altar to the Lord. Now look at verse 5. And they journeyed, and the terror of God was upon the cities that were all around them, and they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. Notice, of course, people understanding that God is with Jacob, and also we see the protection that Jacob has. Verse 6, so Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, which is the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him. And he built an altar there, called the place El Bethel, because there God appeared to him when he fled from the face of his brother. And so a remembrance, a memorial of that time, that he was encouraged because God was with him, even in that most difficult of times when he was fleeing for his life from his brother, that God reassured him. And so we have the altar being built there. Verse 8 says, Now Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried below Bethel under the terebinth tree. So the name of it was called Allon Bachuth. And so there we see Rebekah's nurse dying at that point, and she is buried. Now notice this, starting in verse 9. Then God appeared to Jacob again when he came from Padan Aram and blessed him. And God said to him, now watch this, Your name is Jacob, your name shall not be called Jacob anymore, but Israel shall be called your name. So he called his name Israel. And so there we have the restatement of the changing of his name to Israel. Also, verse 11, God said to him, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall proceed from you, and kings shall come from your body. And so here's that promise confirmed once again, and that reassurance that comes to him that from him would become nations. And also notice kings are mentioned here as well. And of course, so the kings that will eventually come from his lineage. And of course, we think of Saul and David and Solomon. Verse 12, The land which I gave Abraham and Isaac, I gave to you and to your descendants, and you I give this land. Then God went up from him in the place where he talked with him. So Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he talked with him, a pillar of stone, and he poured a drink offering on it, and he poured oil on it. And Jacob called the name of the place where God spoke with him Bethel. Now we notice there that pillar being set up, we've seen this before, but here the pillar is set up. And also notice verse 14, it says he poured a drink offering. Now this is the first instance we have of a drink offering being mentioned to the Bible. And so this is mentioned here. There'll be other drink offerings later on, of course, but here this drink offering is poured upon this altar. Now, notice verse 16. Then they journeyed from Bethel, and when there was but a little distance to go to Ephrath, Rachel labored in childbirth, and she had hard labor. Now it came to pass, when she was in hard labor, that the midwife said to her, Do not fear, you will have this son also. And so it was, as her soul was departing, for she died, that she called his name Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem. And Jacob set up a pillar on her grave, which is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. And so we notice here the birth of Benjamin. Now, of course, this is the 12th son, Benjamin. Now, Rachel had named him Benoni, which means son of my sorrow. And, of course, you can understand why she would give him that name, because here she is having this hard labor and she's going to die. And so she says, son of my sorrow. But Israel renamed him Benjamin. So here you have that son of my right hand, that strength that he is demonstrating in Benjamin. Now, if you look at our outline, next we will see the posterity of Jacob and Esau, and this is found in chapter 35, 21 through chapter 37, and then the posterity of Jacob, 35 verses 21 through 29. So let's look at that section and see the descendants. Verse 21, Then Israel journeyed and pitched his tent beyond the tower of Eder. And it happened, when Israel dwelt in that land, that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine. And Israel heard about it. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. Now let's just pause there for a moment. We see another son now giving Israel grief because of his evil deeds. Here's Reuben that's lying with Bilhah, Israel's concubine, and what a terrible thing that has been done. And, of course, this will be referred to later when we see the punishment that comes to his way because of this sin. Now, verse 23. It says, The sons of Leah were Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. And the sons of Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. And the sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, were Dan and Naphtali. And the sons of Zilpah, Lisa's maidservant, were Gad and Asher. And these were the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Padan Aram. Now, understand here that the sons of Israel are listed for us, but this is according to their mothers. This is not in order of their birth. And so when you're looking at the chronology, the order when they were born, this is looking at it from a different perspective, just looking at it from their mothers. All right, notice the last section here in verse 35. Then Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre, or Kirjath Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had dwelt. Now the days of Isaac were 180 years. So Isaac breathed his last and died, and he was gathered to his people, being old and full of days, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. Now, we notice here that Jacob, or Israel, returns to Isaac. Isaac dies at 180 years of age. And so here you see the end of that life, the things that have taken place, and giving us that information concerning that. And so we see the death there of Isaac. Now, in chapter 36, we're going to see the history of Esau. Now, we're not going to take the time to read all of this text. Most of it is simply names of the genealogy, and so we don't need to spend time doing that. But there are a few things I want you to notice. Look at chapter 36. Now, this is the genealogy of Esau, who is Edom. That's another name for Esau. And it says in verse 2, Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan. You see, that's the problem. That's why you see this line becoming so evil, because he's marrying among the idolatrous people in the land. And so that is mentioned right from the beginning. You might look down further in the text. Look at verses 6 through 8. Then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the persons of his household, his cattle and all his animals, and all his goods, which he had gathered in the land of Canaan, and went to a country away from the presence of the brother Jacob. And so he's separating himself from Jacob and all the things that Jacob possesses. Well, why did he do that? Verse 7 tells us, for their possessions were too great for them to dwell together, and the land where they were strangers could not support them because of their livestock. So Esau dwelt in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom. Now, this is reminiscent of Lot and Abraham, is it not? That they separated because the land was not able to sustain all the things that they had, all their herds and all their flocks. And so a similar thing is done here with Esau. Esau separates himself and goes to another land. He dwelt in Mount Seir, it tells us. And again, it mentions that Esau is Edom. And if you look at the last part of this chapter, after all the names are listed, all the descendants, all the genealogy, if you go down to the very end of this chapter, in verse 43, it says Esau was the father of the Edomites. And remember we said before, Esau was Edom. That's another name there for Esau. And he's the father of the Edomites, which would be the descendants of Esau. And so we see his lineage throughout that chapter and those things listed for us. All right, now let's get back to the main story, and that is with Jacob. Of course, the name changed to Israel and his 12 sons. So in chapter 37, what we're going to see in our outline, it's the life of Joseph, and we get Joseph's boyhood here in verses 2 through 36. So notice what takes place here concerning Joseph. And from a very early age, we get to see some things about him and his character. Verse 1 of chapter 37, now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. So evidently the brothers were doing something that was not right, something would bring a bad reputation to the father's name, and so Joseph goes to the father to report this information. Now, of course, we'd say, well, it's not right to be a tattletale and to tell on others of their mistakes, but here this did concern his father and his father's reputation, and so it was right. Joseph doesn't go around and gossip to others. He goes directly to his father and tells him of this thing that is taking place so that it could be known and taken care of so that the father could have a good reputation and his name would not be sullied in any way. All right, look next. Verse 3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all of his children. Why? It says, because he was the son of his old age. Also, he made him a tunic of many colors. Now, we might notice that made him a tunic of many colors. It's interesting that if you look in the original language, and of course, the Old Testament originally written in the Hebrew language, it designates that this tunic or this coat was made for him, but there's nothing in the Hebrew to say that it was made with many colors. The idea of colors is simply not in the Hebrew text. Now, was it the case that often these festive garments would be very colorful? Oh, yes, absolutely. And that's probably why the translators added that word here. But I just wanted you to know that in the original Hebrew, you don't see that idea of color in the text. Verse 4, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. And so here you see that jealousy. Now, we've seen this before, haven't we? When parents show favoritism to one child over another. Well, now here Joseph is being shown favoritism, and the brothers don't like that. They are jealous. And so it serves as a good warning for us today to make sure that we do not play favorites with our children. Verse 5, Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. And so here we get to know what he dreamed and his telling of his brothers. Verse 7. They were binding sheaves, there we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. And so his brothers said to him, Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. And so in his dream, the sheaf would be the stalks of grain bundled together. And so he says, well, here, mine is raised up and yours bow down to me. Well, of course, they're not going to like the sound of that, though, of course, this is a prophecy of indeed what would take place, that they would bow down to him. But, of course, they are not interested in hearing such a thing as this, and it makes their jealousy even worse at this point. And so he tells them of the dream. But that wasn't the only one. Notice verse 9. Then he dreamed still another dream, and he told it to his brothers and said, Look, or behold, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. And so here another dream, and nobody's pleased with hearing about this dream, but this is a prophecy of what's going to take place, that they are going to bow down to him. And when it happens, they will remember back to this time and to his dreams. Now we might wonder, why is he telling them this? Is he doing it in a braggadocious way, with pride and arrogance and trying to lift himself up? Well, there's nothing in the text to suggest that. We don't see that in his attitude or the way that is reported. Of course, we might think, well, it doesn't seem wise for him to tell his brothers about these dreams that he's having. But perhaps there's really no choice, because they need this information to prepare them for what's going to happen in the future. And perhaps here's God wanting to deliver this information to the brothers and the father as well. Now, the fact that they didn't like it and they didn't want to hear the message, that's not the point. Down through history, we've seen times where God would have a prophecy concerning the future that people didn't like it. And say, well, why are you telling us that? We don't want to hear that information. Well, that's kind of what they have here. But this is information that is telling them about the future and what's going to come to pass. Now, verse 11 says his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. And so the father is contemplating about this and thinking about this. And so maybe he is beginning to put these things together and to have a better understanding of it. And so the father observes the saying. We might compare this to Mary in Luke chapter 2 and verse 19. And that seems to coincide with this in the same kind of way, where God is delivering information and someone doesn't completely understand it, but they're thinking about it, they're contemplating it, they're trying to put the pieces together. And so here we see the special plan that Jehovah God has for Joseph. And of course, it fits in perfectly with how he is being treated. He is being treated in a special way. Well, he is a special son, and we're going to see that with the events of his life. Now look down at verse 12 of our text. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So he said to him, Here I am. Then he said to him, Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. And so evidently here his father trusts in his opinion and trusts him to send him on such a mission as this, that he would go and check on the brothers to make sure everything is okay and everything was being done in the right way. And so that he can come back and give a report to his father, and his father will trust that report because it's coming from him. Verse 15, Now a certain man found him, and there he was, wandering in the field, and the man asked him, saying, What are you seeking? So he said, I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks. And the man said, They have departed from here, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Now, we don't exactly know why they departed that region and went to another area, but here Joseph is guided in this way and knows now where he can go and find them and to see what's taking place so that he can report back to the father. In verse 18, Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. So we can kind of see how that jealousy has built up and how the brothers feel about Joseph. And so here they have their evil plan that they are going to kill him. You see the problems that always take place when you have this polygamous world in which they lived, where you have a man who has several wives and concubines, and the children from those relationships, and the jealousy that exists. So often you see the inner strife that results when you look at the Bible text down through history at these examples. You can look at the sons of David to see a similar thing, the sons of Solomon to see a similar thing as well. It's not good. It's not the right way. God made them at the beginning male and female, and he made them to be husband and wife and to be one, and not the many wives that they would often resort to. And always problems come about when we leave God's plan for the family and for the home. Now, of course, when they see him from afar off, they said, We're going to kill him, verse 18. Then they said to one another, Look, this dreamer is coming. So they've been thinking about those dreams that he told them about. This dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we will say, Some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. Now, you think about this evil that they are devising in their minds to do to this brother of theirs, to treat him in such a way as this. Horrible, horrible thing to do. And then to tell their father that he has been devoured. Terribly cruel actions on their part. Verse 21, But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, Let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. And so we see Reuben is kind of thinking in his own mind, okay, I've got to rescue my brother and not allow the others to kill him. And so I will tell him, let's not kill him. Let's just throw him into a pit. And in his mind, he's thinking, okay, I can go back later and I can get him out of the pit and then deliver him back to the father. And so you see, Reuben is trying to do the right thing, trying to help his brother through this situation. But we're going to see that it does not work. Verse 23, So it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him, and then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brothers listened. Then the Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Now, some interesting things that take place here. Even though here Reuben has come and tried to aid Joseph in some way, it wasn't going to work. And then, if you notice this next section here, Judah is coming forward. And he says, well, let's not kill him. He's our brother. He's our flesh and blood. Let's not kill him. But he doesn't want to save him either. He wants to sell him, thinking, okay, there's profit in that. Why don't we just sell him? And so they're going to sell Joseph to the Midianites. The Midianites are also called Ishmaelites, and the two names are used interchangeably. You'll see that in Judges chapter 8, verse 22, verse 24, and verse 26. So don't let that confuse you. Was he sold to the Ishmaelites, or was he sold to the Midianites? Yes, both, because they're both the same thing. It's using a different name for the same people. Now, these were Arabian traders and merchants who would travel about. And so here he is sold to them. And you think about the cruelty of that and how they are treating their brother. So sad. But they're thinking, well, we want to have some profit. Let's not just kill him. Let's sell him. And so you see the greed that comes in there as well. And they sell him for 20 shekels of silver. Verse 29, then Reuben returned to the pit. Indeed, Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. So it seems that Reuben was not there when these events took place, the selling of the brother. And he returned to his brothers and said, the lad is no more, and I, where shall I go? And so he's saying, where shall I go? He's thinking, okay, what am I supposed to do in a situation such as this? In his mind, he was going to return him to the father. But now how can he even go back to his father, seeing what has been done? Verse 31, so they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. And then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, we have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not? Wow, imagine that kind of deception and cruelty. They knew exactly that this was his tunic, and they knew what the father would think when he saw such a thing as this. Verse 33, and he recognized it and said, it is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. And so the father's thinking, well, this must be what has happened. He's been killed. And he says, without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces. And so the sons are going to let the father think that. And you think about how cruel that is, to let him be in that grief and anguish all this time, thinking that his favored son has been killed by wild animals. Verse 34, then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, for I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. Thus his father wept for him. And then the afterthought in verse 36, now the Midianites had sold him to Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard. It's interesting, it says that they tried to comfort him, but they could not. Well, they could have comforted him if they would have simply told him the truth. We have done a terrible thing. We have sold him into slavery. He is alive. We can go rescue him now and bring him back. But that's not what they did. They were going to let their father continue in his grief. And you might imagine how that aged him and how physically that harmed him just thinking that his favored son had been killed. We will have to stop there at this time, but we'll begin chapter 38 and see what continues to happen with Joseph and his adventures. Thank you so much for your attention. The lesson is yours.